Our speaker this morning is Olivia Mofus. Olivia is a four-year boarding student from Yonkers, New York. She's the co-editor-in-chief of The Hill News and vice president of the Honor Council. She's also the proud roommate of Bella Patel. Olivia.
Thank you. My mother works in a nursing home on the dementia and Alzheimer's unit. And this summer, I spent some time volunteering there. I was there for 3 days at about 8 hours per day, but those 24 hours taught me more than I'd learned in years. There are so many different and unique residents who live there with their own stories, like professors, dancers, nuns, and priests. But there was one resident who I remember most. Her nickname was Cookie. Cookie was called Cookie because she called everyone and everything around her Cookie, including herself. To this day, no one really knows what her real name was, but I'll tell you why she stayed in my memory for so long. It was my first time volunteering there, so I was mainly helping out in the recreation unit. We'd get some residents together and throw around a yellow balloon ball in a circle, trying to prevent it from touching the ground. Contrary to popular belief, older people can still be very physically strong. So my main role in the circle was to retrieve the ball whenever someone literally punched it out of bounds. So I was standing in the circle next to Cookie and across from my supervisor. Cookie was talking about a guy she knew many years ago, but I was a little too focused on the balloon game at hand. She looked up at me and said, "That's some good top, Cookie," me being Cookie. Before I could process what that meant, I felt a strong, firm, and confident slap on my butt. Cookie looked up at me again and said, laughing, "Actually, that's not some good top, that's some good bottom." As a woman, I'm incredibly fortunate enough to say I've never really been sexually harassed. So it's a little strange to think that my first experience with that was from an 80-year-old woman with severe Alzheimer's from her wheelchair. I'd like to consider that a semi-happy memory from my time there, but it wasn't always like that. Alzheimer's and dementia are some of the absolute worst things imaginable to happen to people depending on their severity. It's not as simple as someone forgetting things more often or even forgetting those around them. It extends to losing control of oneself physically as well. There were countless times where I was told not to sit on the furniture because almost all of it was covered in old urine. Or when I'd be casually talking to a resident who'd soiled themselves the next hour. And often they were suffering alone with no family or friends beside them, only scattered memories. They'd go through all of this and then they'd die, just like Cookie did a few months ago. These were people who, just like us here today, spent their lives trying to present themselves to the world as a certain person, hiding intimate aspects of themselves for decades, only for the walls to come crashing down entirely out of their control. Once I realized this, I couldn't go back, and eventually I stopped going. This brings me to a topic of this chapel talk, identity. Some people say that you grow into the name you were given, like you look like a Mark, or she sounds like her name is Anna, which isn't an insult to anyone here. I believe this happened to me, but not with the name Olivia. Until the 6th grade, my full name, including my middle name, was Olivia Neka Mofananya. Mofananya is a surname of rich Nigerian history, and most people from the country can recognize its Igbo origin. When I say it, my mind beckons back towards a gorgeous country I haven't yet had the pleasure of visiting, a culture that has been passed down for centuries, and family memories I made when I answered to that name. But after 16 years, of butchered pronunciations at school, in the workplace, and during very important ceremonies, my mother decided to abbreviate our surname for everyone's general convenience and comfort. Mofus. When people ask me if they're pronouncing it correctly, I always say, sure, because it doesn't really mean anything. If you say it, you'll probably think of nothing too. It was the perfectly neutral, modest name of which I soon began to resemble. After the 5th grade, I began attending a new middle school. I'd been at my old school since preschool, so I never had that much experience with new people since everyone I knew practically grew up together. Naturally, with my new name, my first instinct was to assimilate into the new environment. To do that, I became as neutral and unassuming as possible, because if I was who I was, I'd never get anywhere, never be loved or even liked. It became so natural to be unnatural that the longer I did it, the more I believed it's true. And eventually the transformation was complete. Despite my feeble excursions, I couldn't escape the trap I built for myself. Being Olivia Mofus as opposed to Olivia Mofanania had its pros and cons. The classic substitute teacher roll call became much more manageable. And being older, Mofus was much taller than the 11-year-old Mofanania, could do some semblance of calculus, and she could watch all the rated R movies her heart desired. But many insecurities strayed from the shadows, coming into the light. Deep down, I knew I was playing a part, that I was forcing myself to be something else. And I thought that other people could see that too, my worst fear. Paranoid about exposing myself, I eventually found it easier to avoid people at all costs. In the process, my hatred of Olivia Mofus grew with each passing day. Instead of hating myself, I thought, I'll focus on others. In my head, this was the perfect solution, solving practically all of my problems. I turned my attention towards others, and in doing so, began to define myself based on my relationships, for better or for worse. For instance, until this year, I have never had my own room at home, since there's never been enough space for all of us, which is what they tell me. So for my entire life, I've shared a room with my mother. This is not something that comes up casually. I don't usually say, hey, I've shared a bed with my mom for 18 years. It's a queen bed, but that's my reality, and it's something I'm proud of. Sometimes as we'd lay together at night on opposite sides of the bed, we'd make jokes or just talk with one another. I'd be a little taken aback whenever she'd reveal to me her worries or her fears. She's one of the few people that I can confidently point to and say that I love. That bed is where I learned what vulnerability means. A part of me is my mother. But my mother once told me that my father's father, or my late grandfather, once told her that if her spouse hits her, it is because he loves her. Based on that single sentence, you can only imagine the lineage that I come from. But I wasn't me. I was my friends, my relatives, my family, my ancestors. By my same logic, a part of me was my father, my grandfather, and everyone else who came before him. When I'd remember all these people that I thought defined my identity, that hatred of myself only grew. I'd think, wow, my mom is amazing, and I love her so much. It's a shame that I'll only disappoint her. Or, wow, my family can be so awful sometimes. It's only a matter of time, until I join their ranks and live up to their example. Was I the love my mother gave me? The generations of repressed violence and rage from my father's side? Or the perfectly neutral and unassuming Olivia Mofus? The answer, if there is one, is that I am just me, not my name or my family. And the same goes for everyone in the audience as well. I used to think that I was a disappointment or a bad person because of the way I defined myself. But I now believe that people are connected with each other only if they choose to be. You are defined by the people you choose to love as they are. That and nothing more is your true identity. Everything else is collateral. And those people you love, those chosen few, must include yourself. If not now, then eventually. Not many of us are our authentic selves. We've become the names we were given, the gender we were assigned, the sexual orientations we're expected to follow, the races that were labeled, or the system that we were born into. And while these are all very important, they are only pieces of the puzzle that inform who we are. They are not who we are. I'm from New York, so I have a lot of interesting stories from the subway. But one of the nicer ones that stands out to me happened a couple of years ago in Chinatown. It was summer, so the platform was more crowded than usual that day. As I was trying to leave, I got into one of those awkward, I'm going left. Oh, you're gonna go left now? Okay, I'll go right then. Oh, you're gonna go right now too. Hallway dances with this really old man that lasted way too long. A few seconds into it, he stood still, put his hand on my shoulder, looked deeply into my eyes, then walked the other way. It was so bizarre. And in reality, he was just trying to get away from me. But I also felt so weirdly seen in that moment. I didn't know Cookie or the other residents personally, but I can imagine that they had people who saw them for who they were, beyond the labels and the names. No matter what they lost in illness, their lives were carried on in those they were closest with. It's strange to say that I'm 18 this year. Calling me or anyone else my age is just a formality. But I was reading a book called East of Eden, and they mentioned that growing up isn't exactly a punishment. It's sort of a reward, just for other people, not you. As we become people that others choose to love, we can give pieces of ourselves to them, just like our parents, teachers, and mentors once did to us. I can't say with certainty that I've gotten over everything, but it is a journey and one that I know some people in this audience are currently on. If you cannot love yourself, then try to love others first and let others love you. The rest will come soon, and when it does, it'll be great. Thank you.